Murders in a dilapidated, creepy pig farm owned by the serial killer himself. Now that is a dark, haunting crime straight out of a horror movie. On February 6, 2002, the police visited a pig farmer in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, around 17 miles east of Vancouver, to execute a search warrant for illegal firearms. In a chilling turn of events, they saw more than just unregistered ammunition. The owners of the farm, Robert and David Pickton, were arrested and charged with firearm offenses. When authorities gained a second warrant to search their property, they uncovered clothing, shoes, and other personal items that belonged to many missing women. Among the many pieces of evidence recovered was an asthma inhaler prescribed to Serena Abbotsway, who was reported missing by her mom on August 22, 2001. DNA testing was also conducted on the blood found in a motorhome on the farm. It was proved to be that of Mona Wilson, who was last seen on November 30, 2001, when she went to see her doctor. These gruesome discoveries signal the onset of the biggest and so far most expensive serial killer investigation in Canadian history. Subsequently, the farm became one of the largest crime scenes local authorities ever saw. Excavations were immediately carried out and lasted until November 2003. By the end of that year, investigations expenses had already reached almost 70 million Canadian dollars. Were both brothers responsible for the murders on site? Well, no. Pieces of evidence pointed to Robert Pickton alone. We don't need to be seasoned investigators to know how difficult it is to thoroughly search a huge crime scene. It was said that forensic experts and archaeologists brought in heavy equipment, including a soil sifter and a 50-foot flat conveyor belt, just to cover the 383,000 cubic yards of soil in search of human remains. All in all, they discovered the belongings of 20 missing women. The DNA of one woman was found on Pickton's saw, while 10 DNA samples were detected in its freezers. Ground meat found on site also contained the DNA of many other female victims. Robert Pickton did pay for his crimes. For some of them, yes. On February 22, 2002, Pickton was charged with 2 counts of murder. By October, a total of 26 murder charges were laid against him. Years later, in 2007, he was convicted of second-degree murder of 6 women and was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. Unbelievably, he was convicted of the murders of 6 women alone out of the several murder charges that he initially faced. Truth is, his victims were a lot more than that. While Pickton was detained in Surrey, British Columbia, he shared a cell with an undercover agent from the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. Thinking that he was talking to a fellow detainee, he shared significant information about his murder spree. He said that he had murdered 49 women and would want to kill one more to make it 50. Listening to that conversation is an absolute nightmare. Hear it straight from the mind and mouth of a serial killer. Serial killers do exist, but we always feel the need to ask, why would this man do all of these demented actions? What was he like before all of this happened? He owned and operated a farm. He had money. Was he a hard-working, wealthy man suddenly gone astray? Serial murderers lack empathy. They are deceitful, manipulative, and insincere smooth talkers. Related profiling initiatives also show that they are impulsive with poor behavior controls. Robert Pickton perfectly fits this characterization. Robert Willie Pickton was born in 1949 to a family of pig farmers. When his parents passed away, Pickton and his siblings inherited the farm and ran the business. However, as time went on, it was only Robert Pickton and his brother David who took care of the daily operations, as their sister chose to just move somewhere else. After a few years, the brothers neglected its operations, resulting in the farm's decline. They didn't only halt proper management, they also stopped cleaning the vicinity. There were scrap metals, broken vehicles, and random trucks around. Some neighbors even pointed out the presence of free-roaming pigs at the farm's muddy, filthy grounds, which brought the impression that they weren't caring for them as meticulously as before. To say that it was like a scene out of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre series is not an exaggeration. It was really the best way to describe it. In the mid-1990s, the Pickton brothers decided to just sell portions of the farm for urban development. This step earned them $5 million, making them instant millionaires. This reduced the farm to a mere 6.5 hectares, but still enough for them to run a small-scale livestock business. In 1996, 1 year after they sold huge portions of their property, the Pickton brothers created a non-profit charity called the Piggy Palace Good Time Society aiming to organize, coordinate, and operate special events to raise funds for service agencies and other worthy groups. That was their non-profit's goal, at least on paper. They did something else, of course. Hideous, illegal activities for fun and pleasure. They hosted wild parties for themselves and their friends alone. They sold liquor and drugs illicitly and invited plenty of bikers, sex workers, and drug addicts from the downtown east side. The Picktons' wild side took their worst turn when they converted a farm building into a warehouse-style party venue called the Piggy Palace. They charged entrance fees to raise money, which of course didn't go to the rightful beneficiaries. The money went straight to their pockets and was used to organize more wild parties. These crazy events went on and on for years, sometimes attracting as many as 2,000 in a single night. Their neighbors didn't realize that something else was going on, so all they did was complain about rowdiness, drunkenness, and noises. Outside of these wild parties, though, Robert Pickton was described as a reserved yet friendly pig farmer. Would you believe that he was once described by an old neighbor as a good-natured little bastard? He was definitely someone you wouldn't suspect of butchering women. The quietest ones are not always the most saintly and radiant ones. Sometimes the most reserved individuals are the most dangerous people. Robert Pickton was one of them. Bill Hiscox, one of the workers who stayed with the Picktons despite the farm's decline, described him as a quiet, socially awkward man. Although Pickton didn't have a history of substance abuse, Hiscox said that he had occasional strange behaviors. Maybe this worker had been around the farm for so long that he got to observe Pickton at his sanctuary, where he was most comfortable and where he demonstrates his real self. Hiscox's observations soon turned into suspicions. Unknown to the police, as the Piggy Palace parties went on and on, so did his crimes. Robert Pickton's name was first introduced to the authorities in March 1997, when Wendelin Eistetter named him as her perpetrator in an alleged murder attempt. She said Pickton tried to handcuff her, so she defended herself by grabbing a kitchen knife. Pickton had no doubt underestimated this woman's will to live. She tried to stab him, but he was too strong. A fight ensued between them, resulting in serious stab wounds in both parties. Luckily, she was able to run. She asked for help from a neighbor and was immediately taken to the nearest hospital. While she was undergoing emergency surgery, Pickton was in the same hospital, getting treatment for his wounds. Police investigated the encounter and searched Pickton's body. When they found a handcuff key in his pocket that perfectly fits the one on Eistetter's wrist, he was instantly charged with attempted murder. Pickton, however, claimed that she was a party guest who tried to rob and attack him. In the end, the charges were dropped because the woman had a horrible reputation as a drug addict and wasn't regarded as a capable, trustworthy witness. 2 years later, in 1999, an informant told the authorities that Lynn Ellingson, a drug addict single mother, had seen a woman's body hanging in Pickton's slaughterhouse. When questioned, she denied it. She only came forward once again and admitted the truth to that statement years later, when Pickton was already in jail. Initially, she didn't tell anyone about it because first, she depended on Pickton for drugs, and then second, she feared for her life. She didn't want to end up like the woman she saw in the slaughterhouse. Ellingson's 1999 denial of what could have been a groundbreaking revelation helped end the lives of more women. That same year, Hiscox told the police that Lisa Yells, one of Pickton's close friends, had seen identification cards, women's purses, and clothing at the property. This incident, though, was another dead end. Police did reach out to Yells, but she was so uncooperative. Unfortunately, authorities couldn't act on it because there wasn't any evidence to support the claims. Yells, a possible witness, refused to work with them to put together an eyewitness report. They eventually dismissed the statement as hearsay. Take note that this was already the second time that Hiscox contacted the police about Pickton. The first time, he called the authorities about his suspicion that several distinct items around the farm belonged to missing women. However, due to a lack of evidence, authorities just dismissed them as rumors. Hiscox was right all along. Over the next years, the women who visited the Pickton farm to attend parties eventually went missing. So, how come Pickton was able to go on and on with his crimes without being caught? The parties on the farm weren't secrets at all. People come and go from the property. If the women who attend these events didn't leave the farm alive and well, why didn't it raise any suspicion? Why were the families of many missing women not reporting the loss of their loved ones? Most of Pickton's victims came from Vancouver's downtown East Side neighborhood, an area known for homelessness, poverty, open drug use, and prostitution. Some of the women he picked up and brought to his Piggy Palace events hadn't had contact with their families for several years. Pickton frequently drove to this area to dispose of waste animal parts in a rendering plant, but he had another agenda. Probably after doing pig farmer duties, he took care of serial killer chores. Who knows? Maybe he roamed around looking for women who wanted to party with him on his farm in exchange for drugs and money. Prostitutes and drug addicts were Pickton's most convenient victims. Due to their marginalized and transient lifestyles, disappearances often went unnoticed. In the late 1990s, the rates of these disappearances escalated. Sex workers and drug addicts suddenly suspected that a serial killer is on the move in their neighborhood. It was said that during that time, people started to walk around in groups. They became more observant of their surroundings. Some prostitutes even listed down the plate numbers of the cars that picked up women. Was Robert Pickton responsible for these disappearances? It's hard to determine the time frame of Pickton's murder spree, but it possibly took place from 1978 to 2001. During that time, approximately 65 women vanished in downtown East Side, but he was only convicted for the killings that happened between 1997 and 2001. What worsened the already difficult situation of finding lost people was the downtown East Side residents' strong distrust of authorities. There was a slow response to the reported disappearances of sex workers. The judgment was real. They didn't believe the missing ladies were dead and that a serial killer was at work. Since there were no bodies that warranted investigations, they just assumed that they moved somewhere else, or if they died, they perished from drug overdoses. The Vancouver Police Department later on apologized to the families of the victims, saying that they could have done better in so many ways. If they acted faster, they could have caught Pickton sooner and could have saved more lives. They admitted their mistakes. Whether Pickton was the killer of most of the sex workers and drug addicts at downtown East Side, we cannot say for certain. All we know was that he was a bloodthirsty psychopath who had a strange method of killing and disposing of his victims. No human remains were properly buried on the farm's grounds. Maybe some were just left to be consumed by insects or pigs, or just tossed somewhere to decompose. There are plenty of horrific possibilities since he murdered women in so many ways. Some had been handcuffed and then stabbed to death. Others had been injected with antifreeze. Antifreeze contains toxic chemicals that can kill a human instantly upon consumption. It was also reported that some of the women were shot or strangled with a piece of wire. The horror they went through was unimaginable. Once the victims were dead, he would take their bodies to a nearby meat rendering plant or grind them up and feed them to the pigs. Another approach he possibly did was grind their bodies into mincemeat, mix them with pork, and sell the meat to unsuspecting people. In a strange twist of events, news circulated that he possibly sold human-laced meat to local police officers. While this was eventually dismissed by the authorities as hearsay, it was still a twisted irony that pumped up the already popular and disturbing murder case. Having a pig farm turned out to be an advantage for a cold-blooded killer like Pickton. He can get rid of corpses quickly and easily, with little to no evidence. To this day, it is unclear just how many women fell victim to his gruesome killing spree. He was charged with 26 murders, convicted of 6, but admitted to 49. There was a huge inconsistency between the total number of convictions he ultimately received and the number of people he declared to have murdered. Many of the victims' loved ones would never get closure, and most of the lost women's remains would never be found.